got settled in. Now, how much time do we have? About 20 minutes to unpack the mysteries of the universe. Yay! All right. We got it. No, really, how much time, like, how much of a window do you picture works right now? And then, of course, I'll push it, but...
we don't have something scheduled yet. I wonder, Josh, if you talk to Thomas, and
I messaged him and said we're starting like 10 minutes or something. He's gonna join.
Okay, so
We've got like 12 to 16 hours.
so Thomas said he has some flexibility of like 3 hours. So I guess it's just if we have some time left at Thomas is 3 hours, so we can also talk about the other stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know, an hour, 1.5. Is that enough? Do you need more?
Oh God, no. I mean, feel free to like budget me. I don't want to talk for that long. Obviously, I guess it's a matter of how much question and answer, like how involved a discussion gets. But I
think let's try for an hour for this session, and then I will ping all of us when an hour is done. Okay.
All right.
And let's see. Shows up as well.
It's 11.
I may need to leave early since it's quite late for me. Hope it won't bother you.
Okay, cool.
Sounds good.
How long you want and leave when you need to.
Thank you.
All right. So I am. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be witness to all these amazing conversations and participating in a lot of them. And I want to start out with a reflection from a little video from one of my favorite philosophers who does some work with agency, with talking about what is an agent. And I don't know who's familiar with Luciano Floridi? Anybody? All right, so I'm going to play a little tiny clip. I don't personally, it feels like the right way to get in a relevant way to the conversation here, talking about agency because of the different challenges that perspectivism faces with defining agency. So I'll start with that, and then just put out a few different connections to things that I've heard come up already. And then I can't unpack everything, like the whole scope of what I do. As I mentioned on the very first day, what it's characterized as for me lately, the way I understand it, is as a master algorithm. So, again, I'm not going to unpack that all in an hour. It's not 100% relevant to what, the task at hand is. So we'll start with agency. All right. So if I go into here, and let's see what Luciano has to say.
Hammer.
Okay, so this is a video from 10 years ago, something like this.
And that's because it's working.
Can you hear it? It's not a great sound quality.
Second thing that I need to confess is that I thought this was the right opportunity to use the Info Metrics Institute as a sort of therapy group, because I have a lot of pain to share. And this must be the right place where to have other people sharing their pain. So if for the next half an hour you feel like, oh, this is painful, I just achieved my goal, because I would like you to feel that pain. Now, to feel that pain, you need to be ready to sort of be astonished, I hope, by something very simple. So that's the second warning. If you feel pain, that's okay. If you feel that what I'm talking about is way too simple, that's okay too. It's the kind of pain that you feel when you know, hammer your finger. It's simple and it's painful. So.
All right. So this is. Can you hear it all right? I know the sound quality is not great.
It's, I think we have to. We're hoping focus a bit to, but it's okay. I could.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sat right by the computer because I'm very deaf. So.
You could turn the captions on too, just so we have.
Oh yeah, good idea.
Another way to digest what's being said.
Okay.
What's like
Common sense suggestion.
I know, you're so good. Okay, so let's try this. There's one more. There's a 1 minute segment, and then a 2 minute segment, and then I'll move out. So this is where we're getting. So the pain point is about defining agency in a complex way.
It's probably synthetic and contingent.
So these are philosophy terms, but he'll get out of that.
It's not true about the world, contingently so, could have been otherwise. Now what is happening, and that's the final sort of, possibly only message I want to convey today, is when I was an undergraduate, when Kant was writing, when Kripke was writing, we thought about the agent is based on the view that all this is happening with that Cartesian nice guy in front of the fire. It's a single individual. And for that individual, it doesn't matter. I mean, it could be the universal agent, humanity, you name it. But once you have Alice, Bob, and Carol, you have a multi-agent system. That piece of information in front of you has different values for the different agents. And to someone who actually made it true, surely it doesn't have the same value as someone who saw it happening, as opposed to someone who actually heard that it did happen. So in this particular.
All right. Y'all still with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one more little excerpt here. Da-da-da. 15.
Terms, and I then hope there will be some questions and answers. If you find all this a bit confusing, I think it's natural, and I shared the same pain. Now, in ethics, and we just heard Jim discussing some interesting issues, we tend to look at Alice.
So this last little piece is him giving examples that are specific to ethics for those three different ways of thinking about agent.
Of course, the agent, the one who makes the move. And you pick up your introduction to ethics, and it's all about Alice. Now, most of my work has been in favor of Bob, the black player, the guy who actually receives the move. And if you think that that's odd and strange, think of environmental ethics, medical ethics, ethics which take the patient as central to the ethical discourse. It's not what should I do, but rather what should be done or should not be done to him. So in ethics, I try to show that we should put a lot of emphasis on the receiver of the action or message rather than on the source. We have disregarded that corner. Now, in epistemology, I try to do exactly the opposite. And that's why some people find it abrasive. But it's not meant to be. It's just, I realized this later in life. I understood why everybody was driving in the opposite direction, though, and that's interesting. So I try to show that standard approaches in epistemology, in philosophical logic, they're very much concerned with Bob. Bob who looks at a game. Now, we've been looking at the game since Plato, since we were in the cave.
Since Plato.
You watch and watch, and visualize and ideas, and some aids, some visual approach to epistemology, etc. And you are astonished to know that you can drive and find fake barns on your way because you thought they were real barns, but they're not real barns, etc. I mean, the epistemologists will understand the references. So it's all about getting the information and wondering what's happening to all this getting. Again, Descartes comes to mind. And actually, I mean, especially in these days, when you're actually producing and making and pouring out so much information, I think it's time to look at Alice, the maker. hiding that information, constructing it and so on. And she has, contrary to what Plato argued in the past, certainly a different, and perhaps, I would say, a better knowledge of that piece of information, as opposed to Bob, let alone Carol. Carol, who receives the message from Bob, who saw things happening, while Alice was actually the one who was making things happening in the first place. So, to simplify, and that's the final message of this talk, is in epistemology, you should actually be concerned much more about Bob, and in ethics and in epistemology, we should really look at what Alice is up to, because she's full of tricks. Thank you so much.
I programmed to speak 8 languages. Of course, they said I see you.
Yeah, it did.
Say that again. I missed the reference, but it sounded fun.
He sounded like C-3PO from Star Wars when I was because of the chopper. He sounded like your accent and everything.
All right. So this is an introduction to how I have been. It's a way to describe how I've been interpreting a lot of the conversations so far this week, and we're talking about agency and about holonic structures and what's the system, like what's the organism and what's the individual and da 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 da. So to me, a lot of that starts to look manageable from this view of Alice Bob Carol, which is the maker or the doer, the observer of the doer, and then the reporter of the observing of the doing. Okay. The trouble is probably I would think the programmers among you are thinking of it from a programmatic standpoint, like how do you program for that, and then from a systems point of view, like a person who's wanting to transform systems, the question is, well, how do we like manage all these layers in a constructive way, especially if we even look at agency as a complex thing. And one of the issues actually points me to looking at perspectivism and why I really was drawn to Nico's view, Nico's sort of vision and way of looking at perspectives. Now, he and I use the word perspective in a little bit of a different way, and that's fine with me. I also use I think of languages in a different way, and that's probably has a lot to do with the difference between focus on the digital programming as opposed to sort of a more integrative view. But I know what when I look at it, it points to these type of things. So when I hear languages being discussed, I'm thinking of forms. And then when I hear perspectives, I think of morphisms. Okay. And, you could even think of these a little bit in terms of the biomimicry. You've got forms, you've got organs, you've got bodies, you've got lakes, there's all kinds of forms of things. And then there's morphisms, which is things change from one thing to another, and we can track that or observe that and record information about those changes. We can even predict those changes, right? And then right in the middle is the agent, right? So the agency piece, this is a very crude, I apologize, it's not super clear from here what things are parallel. But of course, these three are what correspond to the atom ontology, right? And down here I'm basically mapping this to the way I think about sort of the door to walk into what it is that I see as being the sets of information and sort of the meta context that can integrate all these things. And it does happen that these three correspond to Alice, Bob, and Carol. All right? So you just make a leap with me here. We don't have to get into unpacking like everything that's on here. But there's a connection to agency as a complex thing, right? And to this model, this way of modeling that reflects it, that's reflected in here. Okay, so that's just, I know it's like clear as mud, but I do think it, my intention is just to bring in some of the phrases that are already like familiar to everyone here, to just sort of drop in a few new phrases and then make this reference to agency. Any questions right off the bat? We're good? All right. So I'm toggling myself and I don't want to get myself confused. Okay, so I'm going to scope back out here.
Yeah, we need Morris to break it down.
Is he?
It is a
Did he go out or?
He must be. He's always aware, so.
Yeah.
Sometimes he pops up.
Making sure he knows that we started already. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Do you want me to go and check?
No, don't. Please.
I know. I wish Moritz was here. I put these pictures here just for him. Because I thought he would appreciate a few memes in there.
I'm sure you will.
Yeah. All right. We'll keep going. So,
Michelle,
yeah.
can you take like 2 minutes to just do a quick review? So like we have Alice, Bob, and whatever. They represent observer, participator, reporter. Can you just do a quick, in your own, like in other words, like just quickly share what you've gone over, like a review, like where,
Yeah.
And at the bottom of that graphic, I couldn't read all of your handwriting. So like if you could like kind of just sum up so far what you think the essence of what you shared. For me, it's like, are we all understanding those three things? Reporter, observer. That's what I'm saying. The fact that I can't repeat it now, I want to be able to repeat it. So I was saying, if you could just quickly review that high level language, like so we all like it burns into our head more easily. Does everyone else know all three? Alice, Bob, and
I could. I mean, I
or somebody could try reflecting back to see if we before we move forward.
I can try. The way I got it from the video is so Alice is the one actually doing something, creating some situation, context, whatever.
Like they often use the moving a chess piece as an example. So there's the one who moves the piece. Yeah.
Okay. And then Bob is the black player in chess who receives the first game move. It's the person who hears something speaking to them or who receives an action being done to them. And Carol is the one witnessing, staying on the side and seeing that it's happening.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Michelle?
That is exactly. Yeah.
So I wonder how, but what I didn't get is how it relates to what we just see right now. There are these arrows from arrival, imaginal capacity, and participation.
Yeah, I think it would be better to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Before we move on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these three are kind of core integrative concept. So, well, honestly, to be really honest, it's a mystery to me how to resolve or to address the Alice Bob Carroll issue in terms of agency from the perspective of programming this. So, for example, when you're defining what the membrane is or what the DNA is, or what the social DNA is for an organization. So you've got agents within, and then you've got a membrane. Then you have the social DNA that's churning things through. Like how that differentiation comes into play is not at all clear to me. I'm really, really curious, and that's why I brought it up, actually, is because I'm hoping someone can start to synthesize that into something meaningful here. To me, because I am looking at it from what I would call like this meta-ontological perspective, I see it through these ties, through the arrival, imaginal capacity, and participation. So to me, that is those indicate something having to do with how context sensitivity happens, like how we can be sensitive to the context that we're in. So if we're arriving, we have to fully arrive. And this is where when we talk about what's happening right now is what really matters, right? So that's pointing to full arrival. So imaginal capacity is more the how we understand that we're part of the system and that we have a choice to be in this group, or we could be in that group and there'd be something different going on in that group, and so I might choose that. So that capacity to imagine ourselves where we are, but also to see something else as possible and to go there, that's what imaginal capacity is to me. And then participation is like, I can have lots of ideas and lots of ways of interpreting what's happening, but if I'm not really interacting and participating with others in a way that's changing me and that, is reciprocal, I'm not actually an agent, right? I'm not really having my full agency. Does that make sense? So I think of those in a very much almost like a situational, I interpret those in a situational way, but I am also curious how that could be interpreted into our digital reality.
My response is like, it makes some sense. For me, enough sense to hear more of your presentation, and then I'll come back to it. Otherwise, I feel like I would unpack it and we'd end up down a rabbit hole. So I'm glad I know a little bit more about where you were coming from. I don't understand all of it, but it's enough for me personally to come back to. Because
I also have the feeling it's best to continue and also get you other pieces. Otherwise, I'm a bit afraid maybe we lose some of us in like rabbit holes.
Yeah, no, there's a million things I'd have to ask about that to really understand.
Yeah.
When we're talking about agency, is that like the main theme or the main concept that we're like these three things are three forms of agency or three ingredients of agency?
That would be a good question. Like to parse the metaphor was good. Are they ingredients of? Are they reflections of? Are they aspects? Like how would you name it?
Yeah.
Of agency. I'm sorry, Wes. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah,
I think the question is triggering what I also would ask.
Yeah, that's like the question is like, are we talking about agency still? Just so I can make sure I'm
we are
listening from the right reference point.
So no, agency was the way I wanted to enter the conversation, and I want to put it out there as something that is a challenge. I see it as a challenge. I want to put that challenge out of that a lot of the issues being wrestled with right now could be addressed with a better grasp on agency. I don't have the solution, and so I'm putting it out there as a challenge. What I have is a mapping of that challenge to a way of describing a much bigger context. And I mean, literally, it's as big as you can imagine. And do you know, and so but the mapping of it, you know, and when I described it, I think I tried to describe it in a way that is relatable, right? We arrive in the here and now. We make a choice about being here versus being there, and we participate more or less. We allow ourselves to be transformed more or less. And that's part of that's our full agency that we're doing. It also points to, honestly, like almost that ideal agency, the idealization of the observer, you know, that was being discussed earlier. But specifically with agency, it's my entry point. I do want to pivot. Okay? Is that, you know, and so the pivot, just to prepare you, is I'm going to go in here. I want to go to the question that to me is pretty interesting too, is how there's what I use the term binds, and I think it would map to some of the things that are being talked about so far with what did Moritz call it when we Schism, thank you. So schisms, and then this morning it was the discussion about interference or something like this. So bind is another way to, like, we have these really freaking hard problems that humanity and the systems that we build are stuck in. And I understand the purpose of perspectivism of Adam and like that bigger digital world as to be transforming human systems through better digital tools, right? And so there's this diagram is meant to show what I would say is like the general problem that's being that the way I see the general issue of this binding of human systems when there's a separation from meaningful agency. Okay, so the meaningful agency is you could think of that two ways. There's the meaning of being a full agent, and then the agent being able to use meanings in a way that can actually interact meaningfully with a system. So this diagram, again, showing what I'm describing as binds, schisms, interference patterns. When human systems are separated from meaningful agencies, we get truth. Truth is a point at the top of I, right? And that seems whether you agree that it should be that way or not, my conjecture is that is what the experience is like when we are in a bind. That we have the I, we have truth being basically the point of me. At the bottom of the triangle is, and so complex meaning states is a phrase. You could use that to mean anything. That could be your organization. That could be your philosophy. That could be your, like, any system that relates in a complex way and has meanings that tie it all together. So that's just a very general term, but it could refer to the organization that's using, a social DNA, or, like I said. So does that make sense, using complex meaning states there? I'm referring to I and then the groupings in any sense. You following me?
Yeah, if you're setting the terms, then that's fine.
Can I try to feedback again, just to? If I got it right, maybe it helps everybody.
Yeah.
So the complex meaning states I understand now as some kind of particular bias and context and system I'm thinking in that has the benefit of me having some, like, at the center of that, at the top of the triangle, I can see something that I perceive to be true. Because of the context being unconscious bias, I have other things that are in the shadow, that I can't see, that are the complex, that you call complex meaning states.
Yeah, I mean the shadow really, the complex meaning state it's not meant to imply that all groups or ways of organizing things are shadow only. But at the bottom, like the bottom layer is sort of a reflection. But yes, I basically affirming what you said. Yes. It feels a little bit of a interpretation of that it's hard to relate. Like nobody wants to see themselves in that, like being that. But my experience is that this is the way most systems.
No, I mean I would say that I agree that I don't know of anything that's not that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just that
exactly.
Question of. But it takes some personal. That's why personal growth and spirituality, quote unquote, and all of that stuff is important, because then you can uncover more of the veils and the complex feeling states that bind you to a certain bias.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So that's. But
also what I like is that, different to maybe some overstatement, spiritual bypassing kind of way of using personal growth and so on, it shows that there's a reason, there's a benefit. It's this experience of truth, of maybe seeing something with high resolution, which means other stuff has low resolution.
It's just a byproduct. It's a beautiful systems name, Michelle, of that stuff.
Yeah.
It's showing how it's a natural byproduct of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad that's certainly the that is the intention of this structure, to show, there's actually a focus to I, that, and there is a, it's not all bad, but yes, it is something that improves the implications of it, the truthness of it improves as a person is more enlightened, aware, open, all those kind of things. All right.
Michelle?
Yeah?
Yeah. Just a quick, are you familiar with Jungian psychology then?
Yes.
Because it's very connected, right?
You mean like shadow? You mean like shadow, and
Well, just also his premise that if inevitably you have a part of the whole, there will always be the shadow of what you're not seeing. It's not personal; it's just inevitable. Mm-hmm. So I see some of that in your mapping.
Yeah. All right, and then I think we can all agree on this one too, which is the aim of whole systems reform goals. I just made these titles up. That's kind of strange sounding. If I just get rid of that, there we go. Whole systems reform goals, right? So we're gonna find an I that is an agent, and it's agency, and we're gonna have, I call DU, it's derivative universe, like how we actually derive new things, emergent properties. And then we're going to have meta phenomena and possibility here in between. So we've got many to one, higher to lower, smallest to biggest. I being meta truth, and the derivative universe evoking, I call it meta doubt, but that's what you have faith in. I'm going to have faith in this system, right? And possibility is now in this type of, reform where we're looking at the holonic infrastructure and the, agency that's integrated in an emergent way, that you get in a relationship to the personal unknown, right? And that's pretty cool. And that's why I think that's why I'm drawn to the conversations that we're having here. Okay. So how does that relate to what I do? The question marks here, all right? I was kind of debating. I'm like, do I uncover it? So this actually, I uncover it like this, right? But I didn't want to do that way. The question is, what do we have instead of I, right? And what do we have instead of complex meaning states? Any guess? Any like, is there anything that comes up for people when you think about how to bridge that?
JSON. JSON and JavaScript.
I'm not clear enough about how you use words in order to feel good of saying anything. I'm still in perceiving mode and waiting for it to be filled in.
Yeah, it's hard to come up with a correlate. I think for me, like the juxtapositional analogous correlate of those phrases, because I'm not clear enough. I'm learning though, but I'm not clear enough to make a leap. Like it's not clear, like automatically. Or else I'm just gonna be making shit up. So like really making shit up.
All right. Anybody else? Okay.
I feel similar.
What's that?
I think similar, Michelle. I think I need a bit more data.
We need the
To
prestige.
ensure I'm coherent.
We need the prestige, which is the reveal of the triangles.
Say it again. You want the reveal of the...
We want to reveal the triangles.
Maybe part and whole, like I is part and complex meaning states is whole.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's not bad. I was kind of thinking something like that. That's where my mind went to.
Particle and wave.
This is the flux. Oh, Lord of the Flux.
Yeah.
Wrong in relation to that. The flux was the part, and then the whole was the
Maybe I'd implicate and explicate.
implicate and explicate. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for brainstorming a little bit. I was really curious what kinds of things just pop up, if anything, into that space. In a word, in a phrase, shared meanings, right? So asking, when we say, what are we really talking about? When we have a lot of these conversations that start to get really circular, and I'm talking about during this retreat, there's often this repeating refrain of, how do we know, how do we share meanings at all? How do we even, how is that even possible that that's happening? And that there is an agent or an observer who's saying how things are, but it's within a system that understands and interprets and perceives everything that observer does and says. Right? So there's this relationship between our being able to be perceived meaningfully in the first place and something that's happening out there that makes things meaningful.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and there's a structure to it.
It's honestly, Michelle, one of my favourite topics with Bret. I'd be like, in our discussions, I always be like, we are interested in shared meaning, right? Shared meaning. Like, what is this? Like, and again, with my thing that I have with Nico this time, it's like, it's this holy grail inside of myself of shared meaning making.
So
like,
it is,
how do we
right,
shared meaning?
and it's different. I would suggest it is actually different than sense making in the in the way that a lot of people think about sense making, but shared meanings. So that resonates with you.
For sure, Blake.
Yep, because
Yeah.
if
Interested in
if we can point things to a clear enough understanding of the underlying dynamics, then we can relate to that part where the meaning is actually occurring. So that's what my goal has always been, is to basically define what it is that's happening that makes meaning even possible to arise. So shared meanings is one way to think about it. What am I really talking about? So when the presentation was happening this morning, I forget the gentleman's name. Can you tell me his name? Wojtek. So he drew some circles and he said there's politics happening and there's games happening and there's this happening. And how do those things all relate to each other even? That there's a shared context for all these things. So I feel like I'm losing people. I'm looking and I'm like, we can wrap. We can just do some questions and do a wrap, or I can show you, if anybody has specific questions about things that I've shared on Discord, I can address a specific this or that.
I can also relate a little bit, Michelle, from my lens, which is, if I think about systems as Wojtek was describing as effective communication systems, if we can't actually meaning make together and achieve shared meaning, the systems break down. Hang on, I'll wait for these two because they're
Sorry.
I'm just checking because Michelle's checking that they're on. What I was just saying is,
It's just a technical problem. But I'm here. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
You don't need to apologize.
I do, I'm British. Josh will then. And Nico will apologize.
I'm sorry.
What I was saying is, so I've experienced this again socially, Michelle. I think if I'm grokking what you're talking about, is the hard problem we have of what Wojtek taught us when he first came to see us is people firing signals at each other, and the signal hits a receiver, and can the receiver ever really understand that signal? Because there's this huge context, right, out of which the person, Alice, whatever she was giving this information. And so how do we actually achieve shared meaning? Because beneath it is this iceberg. That's what I see on the triangle. Is the iceberg, all my context, all my experiences, how I'm making sense of life. And then I find this thing, and then Bret receives it and he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he keeps playing back to me a feedback loop. And I'm like, no, it's not that. No, it's not that. And we get into these these spaces. And I'm like, I'm not really bothered about what we're trying to say. Now I'm broken down because we can't achieve shared meaning, because we can't see the map. So that's what I'm getting from you with this, is this troublesome nature of shared meaning making in a system.
Yeah.
And I guess what we're going to show is how we can maybe reveal this better, maybe. I don't know. But I relate what you're talking about very much to what we did this morning. For my meaning system of my context.
Yeah. I mean, so just to sort of scope out, Nico, one of the first things that you, like when we first were talking about some of the different entry points to, you know, what I'm talking about, and specifically what you're doing, that you noticed, well, maybe we can use what you're doing for tagging things. Mm-hmm. So this is just to kind of talk about the shared meanings. One of the things that actually works with digital systems where you're sharing information is to tag things, because you have large amounts of things that need to be able to be summarized with a tag, and then tags can be shared, and like hashtags is a thing. If we think, if we take that same solution and think of it from the agency and how to actually make agency be something that can effectively be distributed and effectively be complete, what the fuck do we tag things with, right? Like that's the question. And does the tagging become something that actually can be understood and be applied in that systems? Like it should ideally be something that actually has a systems, like that's the way it's built. So that's what I have, is a system of tags, and they're a complex system themselves. And you know, I don't think of it just as tags, but that's a really like a practical way to think about it that you identified early on. And it connects to shared meanings and the problem that Tan's identified, that, you know, especially when you're getting close to something with a group, that the closer you can get to really that we understand our shared meaning, the more likely there is to be a synergy and a shift, whatever you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's when we have this context, this shared understanding. Say, and I'm starting small here, for a certain domain. We have a specific language for some kind of engineering discipline, and that's why engineers can get together and build bridges because they use math as part of their language. Because then their minds merge in a way. They become a super AI because they have this language.
Yes.
And that's a different way to look at social systems and social DNA. It's this context, and we do have that. We can create these systems, but how can we actually, when we have different ones, how can we get them to merge, and how can we quickly create new ones?
Right.
Because because it also limits. It gives, exactly as you showed in the triangle. A particular one gives us maybe laser focus on how we calculate to build bridges, but that we cannot solve other complex problems. So it's this meta level of creating these systems and relating them again. Yeah. And that's where the context or the term meta-ontology, I would say, comes in. Because you can call all of these specific systems ontologies, but in order to map different ontologies, you need some common ground, some meta thing.
Yes.
And so and you, what you have, you call meta ontology as well, right?
Right. I've called it an object integration ontology. Object integration ontology and algorithm.
The question that comes up for me is, just like in science, there's the people battling with the hard problem of consciousness, and Michelle already knows I'm a fan of other newer philosophers and ideas, and some people are saying, well, that's really an inappropriate question. like it's not understanding what we're dealing with. It's like a meaningless question in a way for people that believe. The hard problem consciousness is in the materialist physics neuroscientist world because they believe conscious literally comes out of material like the brain matter, like it emerges consciousness out of. So they're always trying to figure out, well, how does something bootstrap from nothing in a sense? Like our whole experience bootstrap from this inert dead thing called gray matter. That's the hard problem consciousness.
All right.
There's not one iota of theory or evidence that can even explain the smell of chocolate, let alone where it all bootstraps. So some people that believe consciousness is fundamental would say it's the wrong question. It's like a meaningless question. So in terms of that being like the wrong question, when you say the hard problem of meaning, the hard problem of shared meaning, I'm wondering like, I'm gonna have to go away and think about like, as a rebel and as a challenger, like if there's any juxtapositional sort of thing of saying, wait, is this even the right, are we looking at something else fundamentally askew? To be asking even if there's a hard problem of meaning. Like that just came up for me and I can't say, I'm trying to just share
awesome. Awesome question. Really awesome observation.
And obviously I'd rather see the tagging system in action. Like I got to that point where like, okay, you actually have a tagging system that's supposed to produce a result for me to like have a better meaning making experience. So like how do we get to play with that? Because then I'll learn by doing.
Yeah. All right. So there's two things I can scope to here. So you raised two interesting questions. Well, a lot, but is meaning actually what an ontology can address, and could it possibly even address it directly, or is there anything more fundamental to it? And so that I just want to acknowledge the underpinnings of my orientation come from this graphic that's up here. I mean, it's a table. There's different ways of expressing it. Sometimes I put it on one of those glyphs, the funny shapes that I like, but this is the table form. And again, I don't want to unpack this whole thing, but I want to acknowledge, because it's a really powerful question of what is it that we're fundamentally going to ask. And the question is not so much of meanings, and the question that that I'm addressing is, how do we all know anything, and how can we tag anything in a meaningful way with words or digital things or what? Because it's happening, and there's basically an underlying premise of the meta-ontology, the approach that I take, which comes from pretty, quote, simply, an understanding of these things happening, that you have ontological conditions. And this is actually talking about physico-cosmic phenomena. You've got radiation, light, and dark energy. You've got heat and gravity. You've got photons and elements. And there are behaviors that these have. And the premise is that these are complementary behaviors. So we all understand like wave-particle duality, right? That type of thing that this points to is that we've got this dual nature of existence that's coming into being and that is transforming into other ways of being. So underlying the question of meaning through the meta-ontology, you arrive at this. So from a physico-cosmic expression of persisting or transiting. So these are the broad categories here, you'll notice, are novel and redundant behaviors.
Can you think full screen the whole on building blocks even more than you just...
Yeah, can we just take 60 seconds to look at it, Michelle, ourselves maybe?
Yes,
even one
of
more
course. Were you asking me to get closer?
Yeah, one more.
There.
Yeah. Nice.
So you might notice novelty and redundancy are very common ways that a lot of systems, for example, Jordan Peterson, I know you'll appreciate that, Nico, talks a lot about, right, the redundancy, the patterned, or the novel, the chaotic systems, anyone who does chaotic things. So this would be roughly chaos and pattern type of groupings that you have.
Yin and yang.
Yin and yang is a little trickier. I would say at each of anyway. It's a simplification. Where I would describe it as a boolean of a yin and yang. So this is where you get something like the I Ching deriving from yin yang is by applying things like this, which this is actually a boolean because it's a 3 by. It's just like a hex or like a trigram in the I Ching. The whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I understand, I guess, like the fundamental duality seen now in different contexts.
They're complementary. So the context, and so if you think about it, at its most fundamental, the complementarity, anything that's complementary must also be, self-enclosed isn't the right word, but.
What I understood you saying, Michelle, when you first responded, which like intuitively made sense, although I don't feel quite like intelligent enough to put it into words, but it sounds to me like you're saying, in my words, that like underneath there's a sub layer where complementarity is an ontological building block.
Yes.
It's like it's a fundamental, like it might be one of the most fundamental ways we experience.
Yes.
And before we talk about other categories, there's almost like a fundamental category known as complementarity or dichotomy, and that's more of a building block because if we don't understand that, we can't build anything on top of all the expressions of those things. Right? Anyway,
I have a question in that regards, also with my already a bit advanced knowledge about ONT that I got from you.
Right.
So, I mean, I wonder if you wanna go ahead and also. I don't want to take. I don't want to go ahead for you, but
I love having a direction given because I could literally go any direction. It's just
okay.
Yeah, so I don't mind. But go ahead.
So I know that. I mean, this is kind of the structure and why ONT is this way. But if I would now just describe. One thing I first would say is it's a finite set of, I forgot the number, is it 200, 300 something
176
states of being, you call it?
176.
I just lost your audio, I'm not hearing, I see your mouth is moving.
176.
176. And my question is, are they why are these 176 states of being complete? Why is it that number? Like there is some relationship between those states, and I think that's also what this in some way gives structure to it, right?
Yeah.
Looking at you right now. So I wonder if you want to talk about that because I can also jump ahead and say, well, from in a very practical sense, like we could just say, okay. We don't have to understand anything about why it is this way.
Yeah.
We just take it and try it, and it's just a library of 176 states of being, and those are just tags that we could use, and like we could offer a perspective that any expression is tagged with these, and that already gives us a somehow a simplified view of the perspective. for comparison, for instance, in the synergy engine.
Yeah.
Or these tags could, like hashtags, could create spaces of conversation. So,
yeah, I'd be happy to trust she's got a piece of the puzzle and let's just reverse engineer the experience. Or I could, of course, I'd love to spend a week in person understanding the mechanics, but either way.
I just want to give this as a reference point or the next point we could get to, and then ask like if, do you want to talk about more like, what are these states and why is it this number and what are these states and how do they interact with each other?
Can I just check in with Wes?
Sure.
Because we've already been addressing this. We've gone it's kind of funny you have meta in your naming, Michelle, because Wes wants to know how much we have to meta split everything here. Spectrum. So I'm
I just want to take a step back and then maybe, just so I don't get too lost. We're talking about an ontology for meaning making. Is that what we're talking about? Like we're trying to formalize a model for how groups.
Generally speaking, yes.
And Esperanto, Esperanto, the language, the made-up language. Well, a language that is a neutral reference point that we can propose for everybody, a meta-ontology. Like if you understand that, then you can bootstrap into other ontologies.
But I think
so translation for you was you're trying to figure out.
I think what he said though is fair enough for the moment. I think if you go under that premise, what you just said, is it this? You won't be lost. Like you're learning on.
Yeah, because I think we're talking about very like we're talking about something that's very formal, like very formalized. Like
that's my question.
There's names, there's categories, there's so like what.
Exactly. I think you're right on. This is my hard problem.
Like there's an ontology of like electronics. There's capacitors, there's resistors, there's voltage.
So we reached the hour right just now. Just saying.
Keep going, Wes.
So yeah, like I guess the analogy is like so there's an ontology for electronics so that we can create abstract models of an electronic system we want to create, and it operates in a certain way, and then you actually bring together the physical things and create that, and it does what it needs to do. But without that ontology, it would be really hard for people to talk about it and come to a shared sense of understanding before the thing actually exists. So is this kind of like, am I think in the right space or?
Maybe that as super meta.
Oh, can we keep it simple?
So.
Or can we just? I think you're getting it in your way.
Yeah, I agree.
That's also tethered to everyone else's, even if not exact, enough that you are following, like in your own way. You see, that reflection tells me to your best of your ability right now, according to your worldview, like you are following generally what she's putting forth. Are there a bunch of nuances and details that you don't get or I don't? Fuck yeah. I'm more with you than I am, but I just think you are getting it. Like, I think what you described is another way of saying what she's creating an ontological system to make sense of experience.
Yeah, like what would this ontology be used for? Like,
that was the question I was going to ask. It would be helpful, Michelle. I think
this is why it's a hard problem of meaning that I'm saying.
What is it used to describe?
So what is it used to describe? Well, anything. Michelle's idea of contemplating an object, I could, when she suggested that, I could relate it to Ont and what I learned about Michelle before. You can, by questioning and then feeding these answers or representing them directly with the states of being of Ont, it provides a way to, to bridge, right? You have your own thinking.
I have an example too. When you're done, that I can show.
Languages. I use Esperanto, but actually the real Esperanto on this planet right now is English. Everybody speaks English, although we have all these other languages, so we can translate sentences to English. Now the problem is that some languages are different, and some things you can only express precisely in one language, and it doesn't really translate well. So there are differences to languages, they're not all the same. If we now pick one as the meta language, it should have good properties so that we can actually map reality well. And I think this is what Michelle is about, and what basically she's trying to explain with what we just saw, that the structure of Wand is most close to what really is there. So that it works well. Is that, are you okay with my summary?
Absolutely.
Michelle?
Yes, 100%. Did you have
Why
a...
don't you let's give
Actually,
your
about
example,
semiotics, it's almost the layer beneath the symbol.
Yes.
In semiotics, Michelle,
Yeah.
To
so
me, it's the syntax of experience. And this is why it's the hard problem of getting to me. And I'm like, if Michelle has practiced, she wins the Nobel Prize. This is why it's serious. Because for me, you said electricians can build a bridge after they have a shared ontology. This shared ontology allows humans to build like
Realities.
quality relationships to me that lead to reality. Like that's the playground is human experience more than building a good human experience. You know, everything would kind of stem from there. Building a coherent human like vibe. I got you. I get it. Like
And it harmonizes with nature. It is a natural, not just humanity, but through the cosmic nature of things. Like, because thank you. I feel so like gotten, and I also love the edges that are present. It's really powerful, and so I will let me just check that we have like 10 more minutes, or
I'm good for 10 more minutes.
so I'll show something.
Make sure you share your example when you were referring.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm going to do that next. So this example, it addresses Bret, your question about like what do you practically do, and Wes, I think it could like click a little something more. So it has to do with the way I was describing sharing meanings as a process of saying, what am I really talking about? Or what am I really thinking about? Okay. So here's an idea for something that is like my ultimate wish in the world that this existed. I have a very, very crude version.
Can you zoom in a bit more?
Okay, I'll do this and move around. So this is a search engine. So this is a search that allows you to essentially say something, to put something out there, a thought, it could be an object, it could be a sentence, like just a contemplation, right? Which was something I talked about one of the first days. And because what you have inside this type of search engine is that it's mapping to the meta language, right? That when I say I'm jealous of my boyfriend, I get prompted to say which is most relevant to your experience of jealous. So jealous is not in the meta language, but it maps to possessiveness, it maps to competition, and it maps to fear. Okay? So this mapping process is something that's my fantasy of like being able to add this ability to make meanings, share meanings with people. But so I'm saying I'm jealous of my boyfriend, and I am being prompted to think about it differently. Mm-hmm. So you're thinking about jealousy, but discern, and you could even think of it as a discernment process. am I thinking of that in terms of possessiveness, competition, or fear? And that's a whole other interesting question. And if I pick one that feels right, I have a tag. I am now going to tag it. So that's the process where you can actually, you have to have this ability to search, to map to the words in the meta language, and then you can tag it, or you can actually go in and look more. So that's what this area is. I can also think about boyfriend as love, admiration, or rejection, just as some examples of the way that might map. All right, and then I can dog ear it. These are just some phrases that I use, you know, of what I would want to do with that type of search in my personal, so this would be, you know, my personal search space or whatever. I can make a word choice and go to the next thing, or I can tag it. So if I choose competition, below the line shows that I said, oh, I'm thinking of jealousy, but I can see that I feel competition. This will tell me competition relates to many people's experience of jealousy. How do you want to explore it? And then you can look at self-image, your influence, others' influence, or binds or mastery. And that points to all these other connections. So I started thinking about being jealous of my boyfriend, and suddenly I can see that this connects to loss. Okay? Or it connects to rivalry. So I'm inquiring through my original search because those things map. And this has to do, you know, also, yeah, anyway, does that start to show some interesting layer there?
I mean, it generally makes sense. I would love to just actually do a deeper mock, a deeper mock with you and a few people on your slides. So it's just a more robust, like, mock, or go straight to the technology to do the mock.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I need to have the experience of this to really feel the power of it in my life compared to, like all of our work, by the way, so I'm not picking on you. But, like, the general logic of it, and, like, I mean, for me, it's exciting because I'm a semantic word, like, meaning geek, and I always know people mean different things when they say things. It's like a autism thing. When I hear people talk, I'm not hearing words that they're speaking. I'm hearing, like, a whole dictionary of their underneath the iceberg. Like, that's one of my empathic, like, skills that I'm not a master at, but I'm hearing, like, all sorts of associations, and I'm feeling like what they might mean by it, and it's like a barrage of information when I hear people talk. So, like, I see this as a tool for the magic of words and meaning. So I'm definitely into, like, now I'm just into, like, getting to prototypes in general. Like, we built our tools for 8 years, our open map, and, like, I want to just, like, have the experience now, like, so we can, that's the best way to iterate now. Like,
Michelle, I'm curious with the underlying, and this relates to a practical application for me, meaning making. Can you, or do you, in your system, through looking at the way people are making meaning, can you assess the state of consciousness they might be in? Because I assume somebody who's thinking about jealousy, rivalry, is in a state of, like, looking at life maybe combatively, or a state of like gateway thinking, right? As somebody who, so you might be able to start to, through the meaning making you're doing, look at the state of consciousness, and that will definitely facilitate synergy as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you make that connection. Absolutely. So when you identify where you are, if you're experiencing it as an issue of others' influence over me, that can also give it a way of understanding how to handle the dynamics better. And then the binds and mastery are more of the complex systems pieces. So if I'm experiencing competition, that maps right here on, this is called the self-image control conform dynamics. And so you can think about control conform and how your jealousy of your boyfriend has to do with, these different dynamics. So, and this is just, I mean, this is a very complex this is one of the more complex figures that I do, but there's a simpler version, which is here. You know, you've got competition related to loss. And so being able to contemplate those things. But yeah, this type of thing could be useful in terms of applied systems. I don't know the right word to describe what you're pointing to, but yeah.
I imagine, again, I haven't even got into the states of being influences in the way I'm thinking about sort of the organism, but I'm very excited about this, Michelle. I even think you could probably put gene keys to these meaning triads we have.
Yeah. I have a friend. Well, you know, Sakari loves gene keys, and Sakari and I. He was exposed to my work, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, it maps!" So he's already started mapping it.
Well, that too. Another mega architect. Thank you, Michelle. I've seen something very profound there. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, I want to just show this one more example, and then so this is just a more of a work-related example, but basically the same kind of thing. So so if you have two people who do it, and then they each see how they have a different mapping of the same issue, right?
This was really high-tech in maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also just had another, but I want to let you speak, but I think I just had an idea that I'm excited about.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's you can see it here. We say a person says, I don't understand this person's inability to do anything without an SOP, right? They're a control freak, right? And it makes it impossible to innovate. And so then you've got the opportunity to think about SOP, because what would SOP map to? It would map to rigidity, domination, enduring. So, and that mapping process is, you know, that's the sweet spot for where I'm trying to aim, of like how to make that happen technologically, because it's, you know, it's complicated, but it's not impossible, because we can look at it and it makes sense, right? So I just happen to know all of the states of Aunt pretty intimately, so I can do this. But then you've got innovation. Does it relate to creativity, change, or surprise? And then each of those points to a similar type of set of influences, and yeah. And that's the meta language. And so the meta language has the mapping, which can be because of saying what, it's not, you can think about it as what am I really talking about, but also how can I think about this in a way that other people can, that I can relate to others' experiences more, you know, more intimately.
Or how is a mirror and my meaning making, for example, from a consciousness perspective, from a victim story or a combative story, I really see it help us shift our own consciousness to what it mirrors at us, Michelle. Mm-hmm. That's pretty profound.
Yeah.
Because it's not visible to us. I mean, we do it in socially, but for the technology to be mirroring that would be really exciting. Yeah. Like, Andrea, why did you do competition or jealousy, whatever? So.
You seemed like you wanted to jump in just a moment ago.
Yeah, I guess I could say something quickly. I'm just wondering, are you familiar with self-determination theory at all?
Not that particular phrase. Is there a person that's associated with self-determination theory?
It's a field, or the theory of human motivation and behavioral development. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I'm just bringing it up because I'm just hearing how, I mean, I guess it's easier for me to understand human states of being from like a psychological point of view, and so I guess that's where my head goes when we're in this space, and and think about human behavior. Anyway, it's a really interesting theory, and it's an organismic theory of human behavior and development. I know Tan would like the word organismic.
Yeah.
But anyway, it thinks of humans like what it means to be organismic is that it treats the human as an organism that has certain nutritional requirements, like beyond just like physical nutrients, but sort of psychological nutrients as well. And anyway, the theory is laying out what they call psychological needs, and right now there's 3 of them which they've identified through a number of empirical approaches, and those are like autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And the whole theory is like, you know, if people have those 3 needs met, then those are like to develop into a full human, you need those 3 requirements are prerequisites. Like just like with a plant, if you don't give it the right nutrients that it needs, it cannot grow fully into its entire organism. Constantly integrating and increasing in complexity.
Self-determination theory?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I just brought up. It seems like we're talking about.
I can see it map. I can see how it maps. I absolutely see how it maps, and I love that there's 3 of them. That's not a coincidence that there's 3 of them. Yeah. I would even say it maps to the original thing that I pointed to, which was arrival, right? The imaginal capacity, the relatedness, and the participation, right? Competence. Like if we're not actually involved meaningfully with others, it's, you know, we're not. Anyway, so just to bring it full circle, and also I love that came up for you, because it's a great complementary view, right? Complementarity. I heard you riffing on that, Bret, and I loved your riff on the fundamental complementarity. I mean, it's very yin yang in some sense, but there's another layer that I think you got.
Awesome.
Cool. So I'm going to look up self-differentiation theory, and we'll all just circle back around when it makes sense on different parts of it, and I'm open to.
Sorry, I'm just jumping in because Thomas is messaging us.
Yeah.
You've got a he said ready on 1:30. So just I said I guess roughly we'll be getting there. So maybe want to close the share.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, okay, cool.
Take 5 minutes to.
I will share my idea. And it relates to the session we had this morning with Wojtek, and what I shared there, what excited me, a kind of slightly different perspective, which would definitely affect how we implement the social organism dev design, which is still in the to-do column there. And especially if we, like Wojtek talked about it, if we, different social systems are more like overlapping instead of being like put in a hierarchy or hierarchy, which still overlapping could still mean hierarchy, but the difference is that so far I was thinking about it that the organism is putting something out and the interior is completely opaque for the outside, and then it's the DNAs are projecting their context on it. If they are overlapping, then they maybe also the DNA is still projecting meaning, different meaning onto the same expressions, but they do it over the same over shared sets of base expressions. So the idea now was for the DNA. I mean, we need some vocabulary for DNA flows, and if we would take on as the vocabulary, the alphabet for what the DNA talks about. So basically we define the flows of, okay, if there is a, I don't know, now I would need to be familiar with ONT. So I'm to pick some, so jealousy was not in the, jealousy was mapping to ONT states like, what was it, possessiveness and fear, profile ONT. So if DNA would always be defined on top of that, say if there is a fear tag item and it's close to a possessiveness tag item, then we do blah 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 with it.
Oh, I didn't get that.
Which,
some of the above 76?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's how I didn't.
So that's why I think this process was like, okay, jealousness is something we don't have in the ONT vocabulary, but it maps to these ones.
Yeah.
Do you mean that or that or that?
Yeah.
And so if we would use it that way, different DNAs would be much more relatable and comparable, which also means the overlapping that Wojciech talks about would be much more smooth.
So this is what Chris gave us his hyphens in his ontology, right?
Yeah,
He used to have the meta-ontology, which were hyphenated, which maps all the different meanings, but always reduced down to a meta meaning, which you're seeing, and I think Michelle is talking about, but that's how he was seeing that. For
Well,
sure, Nico.
Yeah, I mean,
Is there a relation to IML or the information economy meta language? Like, is there a similarity at all?
Good question.
Are you familiar with that, Michelle? The information economy meta language? I feel like I thought I saw it somewhere.
is this Pierre Levy? Is this Pierre Levy's thing?
Yeah.
Oh no,
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah, it's different. Yeah, I can send you. I have a link that refers to Pierre Levy's work and basically to language and the difference between formal languages, natural languages, and meta language. I can send that link out. It's pretty short and has a few links in it, but it differentiates that type of work from what we're talking about. And I'm trying quickly to, because I hear, so there's two things. There's the tagging, which has these very, what you might call like ordinary experience words, like fear and possessiveness, or love, you know. Then there is the actual language of how it's structured. And that could be its own way of doing DNA. I don't know if people would have to look at that who understand both systems and the social DNA and the coding type of side of things. So I'm trying to pull it up real quick, but I don't know if y'all are trying to get into a meeting with Thomas. I can just send a link.
Yeah, you can, Michelle, because I think we're wanting a quick tea toilet break.
Yeah.
So if you can send the link, that would be awesome.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's covered in the video that I sent. You remember the 11-minute video when I go through? But I'll just send a snapshot of that one little picture of like the language that I'm talking about. And you can... It's like, it's the structural part behind the language part.
Are you talking about the video you sent me and Nico, Michelle?
Yes.
Yeah, can I share that with everybody else here?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
About halfway through. I'll send a little snapshot of it too, because it'll be easy.
Yeah.
Good. Awesome.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yay!
That was. Thank you.
Phew!
It is.
We made it. Thank you.
No,
all.
I